Began to brag. She said, "Don't you remember me? I'm the class homecoming queen." Now, folks, this gal had changed a lot. I don't want to sound mean, but I'll bet she'd put on 300 pounds. She'd sure lost her schoolgirl frame. Do you suppose I'm the only one who never really changed? Then she wanted me to meet this man that she'd met some time ago. She said, "He's just the greatest." She thought I'd like to know. She said she met this feller line dancing in a pub, and then said, "You know, the social thing nowadays is to join a good dance club." And then she wanted me to meet him. So she hollered at this guy, and I stood there flabbergasted. And I'll tell you the reason why. He wore a great big cowboy hat with a big thick feather band, had pins stuck all over the front of it that matched the rings on his white pudgy hands. He wore about the wildest shirt I think I'd ever seen, and he had his name embroidered on his polyester jeans. Oh, and his jeans were neatly tucked inside these high-topped, high-heeled boots. You might not catch this line now. He looked like Bill Clinton wearing one of little Jimmy Dickens suits. Oh, and there was something shining brightly beneath his belly fat. It was a great big huge belt buckle. Looked like he'd made out of a new hubcap. But the thing that really got me as I chatted with this pair was when she told me what he did, as if I really cared. She said, "My man's a cowboy. I guess it really shows." And then she asked me what my husband did. I just answered, "I don't know." But I know now what a cowboy is, and as I look out there, I see a bunch of imposters, you fellers in those chairs. You dress just like my husband. And I know some of you are ranchers too, but I know that you're not cowboys because you don't dress the way they do. We had now I don't know about Germany, but there's getting to be a little confusion in the United States about what you call your meal. At the ranch we call it breakfast, dinner, and supper, but in town it's not that way, and I wrote a poem about it. It's called Mealtime. In this world of mass confusion and many changes in the land, the terms that's used at mealtime can be hard to understand. Because out there in the country, what we call the food that's served is not exactly what it's called by a city person's words. Now, in the morning, I cook breakfast, but in town they call it brunch. At noon, what I call dinner, the city gals call lunch. Now, when women in the country have to serve the feller's lunch, it's usually cake and cookies and sometimes for a bunch. Our lunch is served with coffee about 10 or 3 o'clock, unless you're driving cattle and then you pack it in the box. Now, our dinner's served at nighttime, but in town it's served at noon, and in the country that's called dinner. Are we getting this all right? I got that messed up. So if you go to town for dinner, don't head in there just at noon. You might not get a thing to eat. You've got there way too soon. But if dinner's in the country, don't head out there at 8, because you might go home hungry. You're half a day too late. Thank you. Now, you've all heard about, well, I know you've all heard about the wildfires they're having here. We're having them back home too, and we're very dry. And the same thing happened about 3 years ago. And I was home alone, and it was a hot August day, and a phone call came. It was the sheriff's office in Winter, South Dakota, which is 30 miles from our ranch. It's our closest fire department. And they said there was a bad prairie fire south of our ranch, and they needed help. And so to make a long story short, I got in a pickup loaded with firefighting equipment, and I went down there, and I spent 7 hours on the gunny sack crew. And there was other ranch women there, and what the gunny sack crew is, you take wet gunny sacks, you have cream cans filled with water, and you soak them in the water, and you go put out spot fires behind the big wall of fire. the fire trucks are taking care of that, and we have to, because cow chips and bunches of grass keep burning and you got to put them out. Well, I come home and I was filthy dirty, and I was tired and I was crabby and thirsty and hot and hungry, and I went over to the television and turned it on to see if there was any chance of rain in the forecast. And guess who was on TV? Martha Stewart. Now, do you know who she is? Well, you know, needless to say, sometimes you compare your life with them and you think they don't have a clue. And that's what I was thinking when I was watching her show how to properly iron table linens. And as tired as I was, I wrote a poem about her before I went to bed that night. And I got coerced into giving it tonight. And by the way, it is the #1 requested poem in the United States today. I feel quite honored. That come out in the Western Music Association magazine. What would Martha do? Martha's making millions showing people how to cook with her syndicated TV show, her magazines and books. But she don't know a darn bit more than gals like me and you, but we don't get a nickel for the many things we do. It never seems to matter when her hair gets in her eyes. She just pulls it back and then commences making cakes and pies. She licks the batter off her fingers right there on TV. And why she's getting paid for it sure beats the likes of me. I wonder if she'd fare so well if she lived on a ranch, and what she'd use to get manure off of boots and pants. And when she's plumb exhausted and she has to feed a crew, I sometimes stop and wonder, what would Martha do? When hubby